Welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be crocheting this V-neck cardigan. Now, it's the one I've been teasing forever, and finally, hey, the tutorial's here. Alright, so a few notes on this project before we begin. This is an intermediate project. You're going to need to be familiar with 3 different stitches, so you need to know how to Tunisian simple stitch, how to purl, and how to knit. A PDF pattern is available for this project. The link is going to be in the description box below. Now, the pattern is going to come as 2 different PDFs. It's going to be the pattern itself and then the sizing chart. To access your pattern, check your email confirmation and then just click on the name of the pattern to start the download. Let's talk supplies and just some pattern notes real quick. Now, there is a sizing chart included with the pattern, but I highly recommend that you take your own measurements for a better fit. So you're going to need a measuring tape. Your yarn and hook combination can be whatever you want depending on whatever needs you have. So if you want to use a thicker yarn or a lighter yarn than what I'm using, which is a DK size 3 yarn, you can use that because you have your measurements. So, you'll be able to make adjustments as necessary. Since we're talking about measurements, we're going to start working on those. The first measurement you're going to need is the shoulder width. So this is just a measurement across. So measure from one end of your shoulder to, the other end. And then from your shoulder all the way down to your hip or wherever it is that you want the length of the cardigan to end. Now, for the sleeve, decide how long you want a sleeve. Now, this one is really, really short. It doesn't even go to my daughter's elbow because that's how she wanted it. But if you want a full-length sleeve, you're going to need to measure from the shoulder all the way down to your wrist. Now, the way to do that is to bend your elbow. So this is going to ensure that your sleeve actually fits, as you're moving. So measure from the top of the shoulder down around your bent elbow all the way down to your wrist. In order to help calculate where you're going to need your decreases, take the measurement around the top part of your arm. So just the widest part of your arm, and this is the circumference, so all the way around, as well as all the way around your wrist. If you are making this for yourself, you can just try on your raglan as you go. But if you're making it for someone else and you want to ensure that the sleeve fits, these are 2 good measurements to take. We will talk about how to calculate decreases further along in the video. Now, to cover one of the questions I get all the time is yardage. So I don't include yardage in any of my patterns because we're not all one size fits all. So you're making a bespoke pattern. I can't tell you how much yarn you need for your size. I did, however, create a tutorial where I teach you how to calculate the yardage, and this is for any project. It's just some basic steps. I will link it right up here, and then it's also going to be down in the description box of the video. You are going to need to take measurements, and you're going to need to do some very basic math, but it will give you a really good estimate of how much yarn you're going to need. So yeah, that's available here on YouTube. Go watch that if you think that that is something you'll find useful. The last note I'll leave you with has to do with the hook. Now, here I'm holding an aluminum hook, but you're gonna need a corded hook. I couldn't find them before I was filming. I have them somewhere in my house. A corded hook is going to be your best friend. The raglan has all of these different corners, and just a straight aluminum or a straight wooden hook isn't going to cut it. You need something either with the attachable cord or some way to be able to work around the, corners or the rounded parts of your raglan. All right, so now that I've talked your ear off, it's time to actually move on to the pattern itself. So here's a look at the yoke. It only has the one color for now. Now you can create this raglan using just one color if you want, but I'm going to show you how to do the color changes, so I haven't done it just yet on this yoke. Now, we're going to be increasing every row on these little corners right here. So every row gets an increase on either side, and then the front part, since it is an open V-neck, we're going to be increasing either every 3rd or 4th row. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later because it has to do with your size and, just your general body shape. To begin the yoke, make a chain that measures the same as your shoulder measurement. Count your stitches. I highly recommend you work in multiples of 5 as it makes this next part easier. All right, let's math. Now, for the cardigan I made for my daughter, she has a shoulder span of 13 inches. That was approximately 55 chains using a DK size 3 yarn. Now, we're going to take those 55 chains and divide them by 5. That's going to give us 11, with 11 being the number of stitches you need for your sleeve. If you're wondering why we're dividing by 5, that's because our cardigan is comprised of 5 parts. You have 2 sleeves, a back panel, and 2 front panels. If we were to make this as a rounded raglan, we would just divide by 4. Or at least that's what I've discovered now. Older tutorials might say something different. Back to the math. Now, to calculate our back panel, you're going to take the 55 stitches of your original chain minus the 11 stitches of your sleeve to give you a total of 44 stitches. You'll then divide those 44 stitches by 2, which is going to be the front and the back panel, for a total of 22 stitches. So now that we've calculated our stitch counts, let's set up our initial chain. Regardless of what size cardigan you crochet, whether it's for a newborn or an adult, you're always going to begin your initial chain sequence with 2 stitches and end it with 2 stitches. This is going to be for the front panel. We need to start somewhere in order to create our increases to create the V-neck. So 2 stitches on either side. So you're going to chain 2, and then you're going to do your first sleeve measurement. Mine was 11. 22 was the back panel stitches, 11 for the next sleeve, and 2 for the other side of the front panel. Place a stitch marker at the end of each section, so after the 2, 11, 22, and so forth, to be able to keep track of where we're going to work our increases in order to create the raglan. Once you've completed your initial chain, follow it up by crocheting a foundation row and then a return pass. Since this is an intermediate project, you should be able to crochet this on your own. Before we begin row number 1, we need to determine where we're going to place our increases at the beginning and at the end of the row to create our V-neck. Now, if you are on the chest to your side, and if you're a gal, I'm talking a D cup or above, you're going to increase every 3rd row. If you're making this in any other size, including children's sizes or for a gentleman, you're going to space out your increases to every 4th row. Row number 1 is where we're going to set up the base of our increases. So in this very first row, we're going to begin with the first increase for our neckline. So you're always going to skip the first vertical stitch of every row. We're going to begin on the second one. You're going to yarn over, and this will be your V-neck increase, Tunisian simple stitch into that first vertical stitch. Your stitch markers is where you're going to place the raglan increases. So the increases for the yoke that go along your shoulders, so the front and the back part. All of these stitches are made up of the 2 legs, so you've got the front leg and the back leg. On your increase vertical stitches, you're going to use both of the legs. So Tunisian simple stitch using the back leg of the stitch first, and then you're going to Tunisian simple stitch using the front leg. Both of these stitches go on that same vertical stitch. This is going to increase our, this part, at least this first row, by 1 stitch. Place your stitch marker through both of those loops that we just created. Now Tunisian simple stitch in the remaining stitches until you reach your next stitch marker. At the stitch marker, you're going to increase the same way we just did. So you're going to do a Tunisian simple stitch using the back leg of the vertical stitch, followed by a Tunisian simple stitch using the front leg of the vertical stitch. Now, if you end up doing these in different order, so you start with the front leg and then you do the back leg, it is going to change the look of your increases. So always start with the back leg and then the front leg. And then remember to place your stitch marker through both of those loops. It'll make a little bit more sense further along in the pattern. Once you get to the end of the row and you're at your last vertical stitch, do your increases, and then because we increased at the beginning of this row for the neckline, you also have to increase at the end of the row. So always keep track of what row you're doing your increases in at the beginning of the row, whether it is your 3rd or your 4th row, because you're going to have to do an increase at the beginning and at the end. So here's the final stitch of the row. You need to increase before the final stitch. So just yarn over, and that's your increase for the neckline. And then you cast on into the final stitch of the row. So for those of you using the written pattern, when I say cast on into the final stitch, this is what I mean. Now you just complete a regular return pass, and then we can begin row number 2. So each of these stitch markers is going to be the increases on this section. The stitch marker that we have in the front, which is this orange one, is going to be the increases that we have here for the side. So remember, wherever you do an increase here at the beginning of the row, you'll need one at the end. So whether you're doing your increases every 3rd row or every 4th row, just keep track of them. So here, I'll show you with mine. So I'm doing mine every 4th row. So here you can see I did an increase on this row, and then I did 3 rows of just regular Tunisian crochet without the yarn over at the beginning of the row. And then on the 4th row, I did the yarn over, and then I marked it again. So we have 1, 2, 3, and then yarn over, 1, 2, 3, and then yarn over. Yeah. All right, moving on to the regular row, and this is the one without the increase. So for row number 2, we're just going to begin with a Tunisian simple stitch on that second vertical stitch of the row. So just cast on a simple stitch, and then another one, and then you're going to reach your stitch marker. You're going to need to do an increase on both of these vertical stitches. So I have to remove the stitch marker so you guys can see it a little bit better. Okay, so in that first vertical stitch, we're going to do the back loop, simple stitch, and then the front leg simple stitch.
So now we have 2 loops for that vertical stitch. We have the second vertical stitch, and we're just going to repeat that. So back leg, simple stitch, front leg, simple stitch. And now we have increased by a stitch on each side. So we're going to take these 2 center stitches, and that's where we're going to place the stitch marker. So out of the 4 stitches, get the ones that are in the center. And there we go. So that's what it's going to look like. So this is where your increases are going to go from here on out for the rest of the rows. So we continue with our Tunisian simple stitch until we get to our next stitch marker, which is our next pair of increases. And we're going to do the same. So let's move these. And we're going to do the back leg simple stitch, front leg simple stitch. In the next vertical stitch, we back leg simple stitch, front leg simple stitch. And there are our 4 loops. We're going to place the stitch marker in the 2 center ones and continue. So you're going to repeat this in the remaining 2 stitch markers of the row. Since we did not do a yarn over at the beginning of this row, you will not need to You will not need to do a yarn over, there we go, at the end of the row. So back loop, front loop, back loop, front loop, and stitch marker. And since we're so close here to the end, I'm just going to keep filming. Let me grab some more yarn, and then we'll do this very last one. And we'll move on. Okay, so back loop, front loop, back loop, front loop, all right, and then we get to the end. So we have 1 vertical stitch left right here, and then the final stitch of the row. So cast on into that last vertical stitch, and it's just a regular Tunisian simple stitch, and then you cast on into the final stitch of the row. And there it is. So you work your return pass.
This is the row you're going to repeat over and over again to complete the rest of your yoke. Keep in mind that you are going to have to add those additional V-neck increases either every 3rd or 4th row, but this is basically the same row you're going to repeat.
So remember that for that increase row, the only thing you're doing to increase at the beginning of the row is just a yarn over before your first Tunisian simple stitch. And that's it. That was your increase here for the beginning of the row. So you can do that either your 3rd or your 4th row. Since we're just doing a regular row, all I'm going to do is just cast on a regular Tunisian simple stitch and then just keep going. And that's it. So you're going to do your increases the same in every row. So it's the back leg, and then front leg, and then back leg. If I can grab it. It's kind of hard with the stitch marker, but I don't want to pull the stitch marker out. And then front leg. And then you just move your stitch marker over. So you continue going around until either you get the stripe width that you want or you run out of this color yarn. So I'm going to be doing a color change. So here, I'll show you on this other sweater. So what I did here is, because some of these smaller yarns, like the yarn that I was using, the bamboo yarn that I was using for this sweater, the skein is 50 grams. So this was all just one skein. And yes, I say skein, not skein. So this is just one skein of the lavender. And then I switched and went with the off-white, because this isn't really white. So I went with this off-white. And again, this is just one full skein. So 1, 1, 1, 1. And yeah, so this one, we'll talk about this when we get to that section. But there we go. If you want to do different stripes, then just count your rows. And then just keep the same row count, or if you want to do uneven stripes or whatever it is you want to do before your color switch, just, keep track of your rows, and then you can decide where to put your color switches.
Let's work on a color change. Now, you don't have to make stripes for this project at all. You can do it in one color, but for those of you that want to do the color change, the easiest place I found to do this is at the return pass. It also makes the cleanest lines, but that's entirely optional. You can also cast on in your new color. To switch colors, all you do is loop your yarn around your hook. So this is your new color. This counts as your yarn over. All you do is pull through 1, and now you complete the rest of the return pass like you normally do, yarn over, pull through 2, using your new color as the yarn over yarn. When you get to the beginning of the row, just continue the pattern wherever it is you left off. So whether it is at a row 2 repeat or an increase row to repeat, continue the pattern as normal using your new color yarn, and that's it. You can switch colors as many times as you want on your project. Yeah, but that's how you would do it. To know when you're done with your yoke, measure the back panel. This needs to be the same measurement across as your shoulder measurement. So whatever it was that shoulder measurement was, stop when you reach that. Another measurement that you want to check on is the sleeve. Now the sleeve might be a little bit bigger than what your sleeve measurement was or your arm circumference measurement was, but that's okay. Bigger is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, once you've reached those measurements, crochet until you get to your first stitch marker. At your first stitch marker, crochet a regular Tunisian simple stitch. You're not going to increase anymore since you're already done with those. Just a regular Tunisian simple stitch. Now leave the second loop or the second stitch of the increase without crocheting and skip to your next stitch marker. You're going to skip that first loop out of the 2 increases, skip the first one, Tunisian simple stitch into the second one, and this is going to close off our sleeve. So this is when it's going to create our armhole. Now, Tunisian simple stitch in the remaining stitches until you get to your next stitch marker where you're going to repeat this same thing. This is what's going to create the armhole for our sleeve. So it'll look like this. So just continue to Tunisian simple stitch until you reach your next pair of stitch markers and repeat the same steps we did for this first sleeve. And then just complete the rest of the row with Tunisian simple stitches. Mind your increase, so if you had to increase at the beginning of the row, increase again at the end of the row, and then you're done. Once you complete this return pass, from here on out for the rest of the length of your cardigan, you're just going to crochet Tunisian simple stitches all the way around. You don't need to increase anymore. All you're adding at this point is just length. Remember to count the stitches for whoever's doing even stripes. If you're doing uneven stripes, then you can just switch colors whenever you want. Or if you're doing this as a solid color, just continue working the body of the cardigan without any color changes. When your fabric reaches your desired cardigan length, you're going to add the hem. The hem is just going to be made up of a sequence of 2 purl stitches and 2 knit stitches. We've done this before in other projects, but I'll show you what it looks like here. For the hem, the cuff of the sleeves, and for the trim along the neckline, we're going to use this same stitch. So beginning on the second vertical stitch of the row, you're going to do 2 knit stitches. You're going to follow it up with 2 purl stitches. So in these next 2 vertical stitches. So purl 1 and purl 2. And then you just repeat the same sequence. So it's 2 knit, 2 purl until you complete the rest of the row. Remember that since we're not completing this project using a specific number of stitches, it's possible that you won't end up with a perfect 2-2 once you reach the end of the row. You might end up with 1 knit stitch and then the final cast off, or it might be, 1 purl or whatever it is. That's okay. Just finish the row as best as you can, completing the 2 purl, 2 knit, and then complete your return pass. In the next row, you've already set up your foundation for the hemline. All you do is repeat the same sequence. So you knit your knits and purl the purls. So again, begin with 2 knit stitches and follow that up with 2 purl stitches. The number of rows you complete for your hem will vary based on how you want your cardigan to look. I usually crochet maybe about 1.5 to 2 inches for the hem, the cuff, and then the trim line. But it's your project. Make it however wide you want. At the end of it, so once you complete however many number of rows, and I do highly suggest you count them so you make them even between the hem and the cuffs of the sleeve, you're going to work a Tunisian simple stitch and purl stitch bind off, which I'll show you how to do here in a minute, and then just complete a row of single crochet to create a nice even edge. The trim, so this one that's going to run along the side, you're going to complete it once you're done with the hemline. And this is the exact same stitch that we just did. Now in this little purple cardigan, lavender, in this one, as you can see, there are buttons on it. I didn't want to add buttons to my cardigan, so I didn't, but I'll show you how to make buttonholes for this for anyone who wants to add them. It is not part of the written pattern, so you won't see it there. So I'll just show you how to do them here in the tutorial, and you'll be able to add your buttons wherever it is you want on the pattern. So complete the hemline so that your cardigan looks like this, and then we'll begin working on the trim. So to finish this off, once you've completed the hemline in whatever width it is that you wanted, you're going to have to close off your stitching with a bind off row. The bind off row, instead of completing it as a knit, knit, purl, purl, we're going to use a Tunisian simple stitch instead of using a knit stitch. This creates a slightly thinner edge because a knit stitch is wider than a Tunisian simple stitch. So in order to keep it nice and small and to avoid having any kind of waving at the edge of our sweater, we're just going to Tunisian simple stitch on the knits. And this is just for the bind off. So cast on a Tunisian simple stitch. And once you have 2 loops on your hook, you're going to yarn over and pull through both loops to close as a single crochet. Repeat in the next stitch. And when you get to your pearls, purl them. It'll make a cleaner edge. You can also use a Tunisian simple stitch. That will work just fine, but it'll hide the bind off a little bit better if you work the pearls. This is also why we're kind of saving some space by using a Tunisian simple stitch instead of a knit stitch for the bind off. Once you complete your bind off for the entire row, chain 1. Now we're going to complete a foundation row using all of the stitches along the side of the neckline. So along the front side of the cardigan, all the way around the neck and down to the other side. This is going to be done as one continuous foundation row. So make sure that you have either a longer cable on your hook or, I guess just that you're using a cabled hook so you can fit all of your stitches. But you're going to cast on using the side stitches like you see right here. It is just a regular foundation row, so you just insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. Do this all the way around the neckline of your sweater. As you get to the last few stitches of the row, I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see what it's going to look like. You're going to have a ton of stitches on your hook, and it's going to look like this. It's going to be all completely bunched up. So here's what it looks like. And this is with all of the stitches already cast on. And now all you have to do is complete a return pass. For this return pass, use a very loose tension to avoid having the front of your cardigan bunch up. So as loose a tension as you can, work your return pass until you get back to the beginning part at the first corner of the hemline. So this is what it's going to look like once you complete the return pass and your foundation row is done. Now all you have to do is repeat the exact same process that you did for the hemline. So you begin with your 2 knit stitches and follow it up with 2 purl stitches. And you just repeat. Crochet the same number of rows as you crocheted for your hemline, and then you're going to do a bind off. Now, for those of you that want to use the buttonholes, the process is going to be a little bit different. So complete half of the rows, so half the number of rows you completed for your hemline, and then you're going to complete the buttonholes. But before you do, decide what side of the cardigan you want the buttons to be on and place stitch markers to space out your buttons. So anywhere you want them along the front side of your cardigan, mark the spot where your buttons are going to go. And then on the opposite side, place some stitch markers marking where you want the buttonholes to go. I usually only use 2 stitches for the buttonhole, so it's going to look a little like this. It might not necessarily land on the knit stitches just like mine did. It's possible that it landed on a purl stitch. But what you're going to do is crochet half the number of rows that you did for your hemline, and once you get to the stitch marker for the buttonholes, you're going to crochet the bind off stitch correspondent to that stitch. So if it was a knit stitch, you're going to do a Tunisian simple stitch bind off stitch. So Tunisian simple stitch cast on, single crochet close on whatever it was, whether it was 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, or a combination of the 2, you're going to do 2 bind off stitches. So it's going to look a little like this, and it's going to leave the space for the buttonhole. And then you're going to continue to cast on the rest of your stitches in accordance to the sequence that you're working. So in my case, it was a purl stitch. So I'm going to cast on 2 purl stitches and then cast on 2 knit, 2 purl, and so forth until I reach the next buttonhole. Now, as you can see here, those 2 bind off stitches left the stitches I needed, or left the space I needed for the buttonhole. Make sure you return your stitch marker to that spot, and then just repeat what we're doing, I guess, for the rest of the row. Now, I'm not going to continue doing the rest of the row since I don't really want buttons on my cardigan, but I'll show you what this is going to look like. Once you get to that stitch marker, as you're working your return pass, you are going to chain 4 stitches. If you're using a really small button, you can chain 3, but 4 is a pretty good number. You'll be able to adjust the width of your buttonhole in the next row. So as you're casting on for the next row, but chain 4 and then continue to work your return pass just the way you normally would until you reach your next stitch marker. And then again, chain either 3 or 4. Make sure you keep that consistent. But here's the buttonhole. So after this, complete the rest of your return pass And then you're going to start casting on another row using the same sequence, the purl, purl, knit, knit, until you reach the buttonhole, at which point you're going to cast on another, I guess it's like a foundation stitch. But here, I'll cast on the stitches I need until I get to that buttonhole and show you what I mean. Once you reach the buttonhole, we're going to have to cast on 2 loops so that it corresponds to the number of stitches that we did the bind off for the buttonhole. So you're just going to yarn over, and then you're going to insert your hook into the chain space. So we'll do it again. So yarn over, insert your hook into the chain space, so just in the middle of the space, not into any particular stitch. Yarn over and pull up a loop. And then continue the sequence just the way you normally would. You're going to have 1 additional stitch. So here are my 2 purl stitches, and there was an additional purl stitch right there that we're just going to skip. Go to the next 2 stitches of the sequence, whether it is 2 purl or 2 knit, go to that stitch and complete the stitch as necessary. So whether it is a knit stitch, you knit. If it's a purl stitch, you purl. But skip the stitch right after the chain, as that was an additional stitch that was created when we were creating the bind off. And we don't want the edge to be wavy and to throw off the sequence. So just skip it. Now you're going to complete a return pass per, regular, and complete the rest of the stitches or the rest of the rows you need for your hemline. If you want it to be completely even, then maybe subtract 2 rows from the hemline stitch to accommodate the width of the trim in the hemline. But, at this point, you can just kind of adjust it however you want. You can also use a measurement. So if you're using a 1.5 inch hemline, then make a 1.5 inch trim. But yeah, once you finish your bind off, you can do 1 to 2 rows of single crochet to create a nice clean trim line. You can also do the same for the hemline to make them match. All right, so the last bit that's left is our sleeve. Now here's a completed sleeve, and here's with all of the stitching. But what your fabric is going to look like before you sew it is like this one. So it's going to be an open fabric just like this. You're going to crochet a series of decreases. This will create a nice sleeve that tapers towards the cuff, and it's just better form fitting. Then at the end, you're just going to add the cuff that looks the same as a hemline. It's the same stitching along with that row of single crochet. When you're done, leave a nice long thread, which is what you're going to use to sew the bottom of your sleeve closed. Now let's take a look at how you're going to work the decreases for your sleeve, and then I'll show you how to sew the sleeve closed. To cast on the sleeve, think back to the stitch that we skipped when we were creating the armhole. Cast on into that stitch, and then just work 4 rows of Tunisian simple stitch. Once you have 4 rows, you're going to work your first decrease. For the decrease, you're going to Tunisian simple stitch 2 together, and all you do is insert your hook behind the top leg of the first vertical stitch and then the second vertical stitch, yarn over and pull through 2. Tunisian simple stitch in each of the remaining stitches of the row until you get to the final 2. At the final 2 stitches, you're also going to decrease. So wherever you decrease at the beginning of the row, you're going to decrease at the end. This will create a tapering off effect on the fabric. So here are the last 2 vertical stitches and then the final stitch of the row. So Tunisian simple stitch 2 together using these the last 2 vertical stitches, and then just cast on into the final stitch of the row. Where to place your decrease rows will depend on the weight of your yarn. So if you're using a sport yarn, it's every 10th row. For DK, it's every 8th row. For a medium or worsted yarn, it's every 6th row. And for a bulky or chunky yarn, you would do every 5th or 4th row. This is just a general guide. There is an entire section of math on the PDF pattern so that you can calculate exactly where to place your decreases so that you get the perfect tapered sleeve. But that's on the PDF pattern if you're interested in looking at that. You complete the sleeve length that you want and you've added the cuff. It's time to sew the sleeve closed. Now you can use any stitch you want, and I'll show you the stitch that I use. I don't think it requires a whole lot of verbal explanation, but I'll just play some nice music. You can watch how I sew it shut. Use any stitch you want. Remember to weave in all of your ends once you are through with your project, and you will be done. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down in the comment section below or just shoot me an email. You can also find the PDF pattern and my shop. The link is in the description box below. And yeah, I'll see you all again in the next tutorial.